From Omega to Alpha, the Esoteric Significance of 9/11 by J C Crowe. The devastating attacks which took place in New York and Washington on September the 11th, 2001 look set to outstrip the JFK assassination and the death of Princess Diana as the world's greatest provider of conspiracy theories. At the point of speaking, dozens of different plots have been exposed on the internet. On the 30,000 or so websites that specialise in conspiracies, the events of September the 11th are referred to as 9/11, and also the country's emergency number. In some Middle Eastern and Muslim circles, the idea of a Zionist conspiracy is favoured. This says that Mossad and the Israeli government masterminded the scheme to damage Arab interests internationally. Another version has it that the Israeli government secretly told 4,000 Israelis who work in Manhattan to stay away on the day of the attack. Among American conspiracy theories, fingers are pointed at the Bush administration. One even cites the tarot cards. The six-pointed star, Jewry's capital after Jerusalem, New York City, and the five-pointed star, Masonry's military capital, Arlington's five-sided Pentagon, were shown to be symbolically and literally weak on September the 11th. Robin Ramsay, a British author of a book on conspiracy theories, says, to quote him, "Emails that are circulating at the moment refer to the WTC attack in terms of the Reichstag fire. According to this theory, the CIA orchestrated the terrorism so that the Bush administration could withdraw civil liberties and impose a fascist government." The American conspiracy theorist Sherman Shkolnik declared the US government knew about the attacks. To quote him, "The CIA was also informed prior to the terrorist attacks scheduled for 9/11, Emergency Day, that highly skilled Iraqi pilots were among the 4,000 Iraqi officers resident in the US. The Conformist, an American conspiracy site, said that the evidence of a fundamentalist Arab involvement was just a little too pat. To quote, "On the Saturday, just days after the attack, they announced that in the rubble of the World Trade Center they found one of the terrorists' passports. We all saw the fireball. The fire was so hot that it turned the steel of the building into hot, liquid, molten metal. But his passport survived." Others do not believe that the jets alone could have caused the two towers to crumble. Robin Ramsay says that some find it difficult to credit that the buildings would have collapsed from the top down. The way they collapsed was like tower blocks that had been professionally and carefully demolished, with explosives at every pillar, he says. There have also been endless rumours of prior knowledge. According to one, a US Navy serviceman stationed on an aircraft carrier called his family in America well before the crashes, alerting them that, quote, "something big was about to go down in a major urban area." Even decades-old grudges have been re-emerging. Russia knew in advance, encouraging citizens to cash out dollars, said another report. Perhaps the most unhinged of all the theories was the idea that the Swiss did it. According to this one, there was a meeting of the Bank of International Settlements on the day of the attack. The BIS is known as the Bank of the World's Central Bankers. The idea is that it would raise the price of gold, in which the Swiss have large holdings, to strengthen the already strong Swiss position, were it to join the euro later in the year 2001. But when so little real evidence is ever made public, and presumably there is good reason why it isn't, what distinguishes a conspiracy theory from a viable one? After all, with the little substantial evidence that has been produced for the public to scrutinise, blaming Osama bin Laden also remains merely a conspiracy theory along with all the others. As with most other earth-shattering world events, we shall never know the truth of the matter, for truth is the one thing that we are never allowed to know. What we must all seek to understand, however, is the underlying reasons why this event took place. In order to begin to gain such understanding, it may be worthwhile pondering on an apparently insignificant compact disc album which, due to the contentious nature of its cover, was destroyed out of respect to those who lost their lives in the explosions but days after the event took place. For the picture on the cover looked exactly like those which covered the front pages of our daily newspapers, capturing the horrific moment the tragedy occurred. The dramatic picture was created for US hip-hop group The Coop CD. It showed rappers Boots Riley and DJ Pam the Funkstress blowing up the ill-fated skyscrapers, eerily positioning a ball of flames in the exact spot where the second passenger jet hit the South Tower. The uncanny thing, however, is that the record company 75 Arc produced this cover 3 months before the tragedy took place. A bit like Princess Diana having entered into negotiations about making a film of her death by a road accident some months before the actual death took place. But one might be given to ask, what possible connection could there be between an isolated CD cover and a major world event? The connection is this: all events on the earth originate in the invisible worlds. They originate in the worlds of thought. The horrific picture on the front of the now discarded CD was not as isolated as may be thought. For apart from the fact heavy metal group Dream Theater's live scenes from New York and several other planned films included the Manhattan skyline with the twin towers of the World Trade Center and the Statue of Liberty in flames. Such a scene at a symbolic level has probably been a prominent theme in the collective consciousness of much of humankind. Such a concept was superbly illustrated by Tom Lubbock by way of a cartoon in a British national newspaper entitled Our Thoughts. The cartoon depicted a sequence of increasingly large thought bubbles emanating from a person's head, the final one emitting a massive explosion. But why should such a violent thought be held in the collective consciousness of humankind? What possible motivation could we have for so holding it? Were one to take a glance at the home page of a Christian Coalition website, one would come across a message which expresses little doubt as to what the New York destruction portended. The fact is that the kingdoms of this world cannot continue much longer, it says. Such a message is inspired by the book of Revelation, such as, "In 1 hour your judgment is come." Although one might think it to be a touch extreme to view the attacks on New York and Washington as a harbinger of the apocalypse, there is little doubt that such a thought has been and still is occupying the minds not only of millions of Americans, but the minds of people all over the world. For example, within 2 weeks of the disaster, the top 10 best-selling books included a weighty tome about germ warfare, 2 editions of the prophecies of Nostradamus, and Desecration, Antichrist Takes the Throne, a thriller about the end of the world. Likewise, a new film seized on the apocalyptic gloom in its marketing. Revelation spoke of mankind's final days. That time has arrived. Read the advertisement for Megiddo, a sequel to the end of the world hit of 1999, The Omega Code. The movie did the best business of any US film released at the time. Now, the world as a physical entity isn't coming to an end, but the world as we have known it most certainly is. The reason for this is that life upon the earth moves in cycles. Eventually, each cycle inevitably draws to a close, but only in order that in the form of an upward spiral, a new, higher, finer, more elevated cycle might come into being. The old life cycle on the earth has more than drawn to a close. In fact, it's well past its sell-by date. It has passed Omega point. The only problem is that the movement from Omega to Alpha, the commencement of the new life cycle, cannot be made until all that has entailed life on Earth during the old past cycle has been satisfactorily reviewed and resolved. This means that every conceivable thought, word and deed which has taken place on the earth during this past cycle of activity must be reviewed, forgiven, accepted, blessed, and then released, in order that adequate space might be made for the new to come. Whether this is effected willingly or unwillingly, easily or with no little travail, is of course utterly up to us. But make no mistake about it, such a review must inevitably take place, for the time has truly come when there is nothing hidden that shall not be revealed, and when every ear shall hear, and every eye shall see. During such a time of revelation and self-exposure, which is now beginning to happen, for we can't keep running away from ourselves forever, we shall stand in the clear light of our own judgment. We shall be our own judge and jury in the light of how we stand in the presence of universal law. For the fact of the matter is this: we are all here now. Every entity, incarnate or discarnate, who has played a part on the stage of life on earth during the last cycle of activity is here, right here. The astral world, that repository of all of the thoughts, feelings, words and acts during that cycle, is also here, right here. We walk down its street and speak its language. And as we walk down it, it continually reminds us of all the thoughts, words, feelings and deeds which we have done since time immemorial, which have prevented but one person, place, condition or thing from obtaining its highest good. It's a bit like doing the spot waltz. Here we all are, strutting our stuff in the ballroom of life, congratulating ourselves about what we consider to be the wonderful job that we have made on planet Earth. Then, all of a sudden, the band stops playing and we all freeze on the spot. We are powerless to move until we have put the Earth's house in order. Perhaps we can now begin to understand the reason for 9/11. The devastation took place because the astral world, that repository of all of our thoughts, words, feelings and deeds since time immemorial, had reached bursting point. It just had to explode somehow, somewhere. After all, we, humankind, had done precious little at bringing resolution to the old cycle and putting the Earth's house in order. If the explosion hadn't happened in Washington and New York, then it would inevitably have happened somewhere, sooner or later. Perhaps we can also now begin to understand why it was specifically New York and Washington which felt the full force of the hammer. In order that such comprehension might be gained, it is essential to grasp the fact that the symbolic meaning of both the twin towers of the World Trade Center and the Pentagon far exceeded their mundane roles. For unfortunately for those thousands of people who were either severely injured or who lost their lives in the explosions, and their loved ones, both of these places symbolized in the collective consciousness of humankind an insidious evil, expressed through exploitation and control, which has existed throughout the entirety of the outgoing cycle of Earth plane activity. Admittedly, neither the United States of America nor the Western world, for that matter, can possibly assume sole responsibility for all of this, although neither have done much to help matters during the last couple of centuries either. But the all-important point is that these two places have become contemporary symbols for all of the iniquitous acts which have taken place on the earth since time immemorial. If anyone should attempt to deny this fact, then maybe they would care to take a look at much of the language that has been hurled around the globe since 9/11. Crusade, infidels, barbarians, heathen, Holocaust. And that's just for starters. All of this is hardly the language of the 21st century, which only goes to show that the attacks on New York and Washington and the reprisal are about far more than acts of modern terrorism. They are about grievances, both real and imaginary, which have lurked in the shadowy depths of the collective consciousness of humankind for eons. At this point, it is of the utmost importance not to make the mistake of allopathic medicine and confuse the symptom with the cause. Such things as global capitalism and terrorism, no matter how unpleasant both of them might be, are not the cause. They are merely symptoms. The cause lies in the one true conspiracy theory which doesn't appear to feature on any website. The conspiracy theory is this: It is the conspiracy against the self. For somewhere along the line we have conspired against ourselves. The world's mythologies attempt to portray this in many ways. The fall of man, the fall of Lucifer, the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. You name it, there is bound to be a myth attempting to describe it. The fact of the matter is this, that sometime during the last outgoing cycle of activity here on earth, we, for some inexplicable reason, made the decision to believe that we were not our own spirits. Maybe, as Nelson Mandela has so aptly reminded us, we feared our own spiritual power, so much so that we decided to disown it. And in disowning it, we projected it outwards onto the world. Over this time, this projected spiritual power formed as a world ego, a thing of mere delusion. A world ego which as time went by became an institutionalization of our disempowerment in the form of religious organizations, political structures, legal systems and economic and educational and health establishments, to which we said, "You're all right. How am I? Please tell insignificant little me how to live my life." A request which was quite understandably met with considerable compliance. Since that very day we have been held in captivity by egotistic organisations and institutions which exist only as containers of our projected disowned power. As with any ego structures, these institutions exist only because of the power which we give them. Standing in their own power, which is utterly non-existent, they are nothing. For they have no power of their own, only ours, which we unwittingly give to them. If we were to be our own spiritual monarchs, we wouldn't need a monarchy. If we allowed our spirits to preside over ourselves, we wouldn't need a presidency. If we, at a spiritual level, fully observed ourselves, we wouldn't need security cameras. If we were in touch with our true spiritual identities, we wouldn't need identity cards. How resentful we must be of ourselves that we have given all this precious power away, enough to turn us into terrorists, might you not think? The real battle between America, the Western world, and global capitalism as the institutionalization of our disempowerment and the terrorists exists out there in the world only by projection. The real battle between the institutions of our disempowerment and the terrorists are within us. The real battle rages not on the streets, but in our souls. So what do we need to have to do about all of this? Well, it was rather amusing to learn that America had chosen Operation Enduring Freedom as the name for its military deployment. After all, freedom is something that really has to be endured, isn't it? And doubtless the terrorists will have chosen a similar motto for their campaign as well. Of course, freedom isn't something which can be fought for, which again would be merely to mistake the symptom for the cause. One can be incarcerated in the most secure jail and yet be utterly free. On the other hand, one can drift around in a boundaryless desert and yet be bound in a state of abject captivity within oneself. At the last resort, it all depends on one's perspective. Becoming free is, in the last analysis, a simple thing. It requires no bombs, no biological weapons, no guns, no protests, no placards, no opposition even. All that it requires of us is that we, from the depths of our beings, disidentify from our inner controllers and terrorists and start to affirm to ourselves that we are the sovereign spirits that we are, and to start living according to that truth. For as soon as this becomes effected in our lives, we automatically begin to reclaim our power from the controlling institutions to which we have sold ourselves. Of course, such may be met with just a little resistance here and there, for anything that is founded upon an egotistical base of falsely appropriated energy is terrified of that energy being lost. But because that energy is of an inflated nature, the slightest prick will cause it, like the proverbial balloon, to shrivel up into a state of pathetic nothingness. We have therefore to give no attention to these outer controllers or terrorists. Rather, we must centre on our own energy source, be proactive in the knowledge that as we begin to put our own house in order, these outer projected aspects of our own previous disempowerment will gradually wither away. Indeed, strong in our own spirits, were we all to regularly and relentlessly to make but minor practical adjustments to our lives, the world would be turned upside down for the good overnight. This strategy, together with a larger scale strategy for planetary transformation, is so laughingly simple that anyone can partake of it. It requires no meetings, no proposals, no minutes, no top-heavy bureaucratic structures, no think tanks, no special interest groups, no governments. Just ourselves, committed wholeheartedly to our own spirits. This is something that I have written and spoken profusely about, and further information about it can be obtained from the address at the end of this communication. We have quite erroneously led ourselves to believe that the way life is structured upon the earth is the only way. In fact, it is one of many ways. Indeed, because it has been built up of generation after generation of delusion, it is an exceedingly false way. But a completely new way of living is waiting to manifest upon planet Earth, the likes of which has not been witnessed here before. A way of living that is in accordance with universal law. A way of living that will be expressive not of the world of ego, but of the world's soul. A way of living which will be expressive of a new civilization, which as a kernel of the new within the shell of the old, we are being asked to usher in. Such is the new cycle of Alpha beckoning to us. But for now we must, strong in our own spirits, move courageously from Omega to Alpha.